our son, so I gave another piece of advice to, you always know you've raised independent kids when they don't listen to you. And he told his mission president
that he was gay.
That he was struggling.
And he had told him not to.
I told him not to. I said, if you are or not, I don't care. Figure it out on your own, but it's not going to help you.
He was worried how people would treat him.
Right.
So the mission president calls me and he goes, yeah, I talked to Josh and I want him to get into counseling. And we have this really good LDS counselor that's a missionary. I said, well, what are his credentials? And he was a family counselor and had no business counseling gay kids. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm actually putting it as a stipulation that your son has to go to counseling with this person to stay on his mission. And so I called Josh and I said, what do you think? And he's like, no, I think it'll be fine. It'll be okay.
The letter that I received from Josh was, this is why I was sent to Lithuania, is because he's going to cure me of my gayness.
Oh, really? How did that make you feel?
I was a little heartbroken because by then I knew that you were born gay, because I knew he'd been struggling for so many years.
Yes.
He didn't want to be gay. And so I fully, I knew that gayness wasn't a choice. So I just thought, kid, you're setting yourself up for failure. That he was just so convinced that this was good. This was it. This is why I'm supposed to be here. I'm going to be cured of my gayness. Life is going to be good now.
So let me, if I could just jump in and ask, You're drinking by this point, like lightly,
yeah,
for business purposes.
Yeah, only for business.
And you're working, which is probably more of a sin in Mormonism than drinking.
I actually wasn't working in Japan, but talking about working, I had somebody get mad at me for working on Sundays as state president.
No, what I'm trying to say is that you're both kind of not fully Orthodox Mormons,
right?
And so your son comes to you and says, I'm going to go to mission, and he's gay. Was there any part of you that were like, don't go on a mission? Like this church isn't for you.
Yeah.
Don't go.
Or even around attending church, that did you ever have this moment of like, we know the messaging. And if our child really thinks that means he's absorbing all this sort of self-hatred, did you ever have feelings like that you were wrestling
He
with?
has this way of, he's got such a strong, amazing personality that I think people look past it. And it was like, okay, whatever. And he wasn't like, I don't want to use the wrong word, but he wasn't real flamboyant, running around telling everybody he's gay. He kind of kept it to himself. And so it wasn't really a conversation. And in Nebraska, he didn't really, he wasn't dating anybody. He wasn't, and so it was more just like a sub-conversation. I think he kept it a little quieter with the church. He didn't announce it.
But in terms of when I asked if you had thought about telling him not to go on a mission.
Absolutely.
You thought about it, but did you actually tell him?
I told him I didn't think he should.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I said, but I'll support you if you want. I'm not going to tell you not to.
Did you say why?
Yeah. And again, like Jen said, he wasn't 100% committed that he was gay. I think he knew he was, but I don't think he was. There was still a doubt.
I don't think he knew he was born gay.
There was still a doubt
or something.
So he had taken in enough of the church conditioning around it. That's what it sounds like to me.
That's exactly it. And that, he probably had a harder time leaving the church than he did for sure with all that. And when we talk about what happens next, that was kind of the pinnacle.
Okay. So your mission president is saying your gay son needs counseling.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. And then what happened?
So I called Josh and I said, what do you think? Do you want me to fight this? And he's like, no, I think it'll help me. And so, okay. So he starts going to counseling. And very quickly we realized he's almost a year into it. He left in the summer, and this is probably May. We realized
2012?
2012.
Okay.
2013. 2013. So he left in 12 and 2013.
Okay.
We realized that his demeanor was changing significantly.
Yeah.
He was depressed. He wasn't the same, and he never struggled with depression. He was always just
he was the most
we'd move into a new neighborhood,
wonderful person in the world, and all of a sudden he's not. I mean, it wasn't my kid.
Yeah,
my kid was gone.
Yeah, and so I started. He luckily had found a member in the area that would let him use his cell phone, so I could talk to him. Mm-hmm. And I said, what's going on? He said, going to this counselor is just making me crazy. It's just, I'm depressed and I feel bad about myself. And I was like,
The counselor told him it was his fault. He wasn't trying hard enough to not be gay.
Yeah, you're not washing the gayness away. Mm-hmm. And so I said, all right, you know what? You're done counseling. And I said, I'm going to call the mission president. I'm going to tell him. And I said, the ramifications might be that you get sent home. I said, this guy's not. I did not like this mission president, and it came out in a very bad way later. But I said, the ramifications might be that you get sent home. And he said, okay. I said, can you live with that? And he said, yeah. So I called the mission president. I said, he's not going to counseling anymore. And I said, you do what you want, but he's not going to counseling. I'm his father, and you're not letting him go to counseling. Mm-hmm. He's like, okay, that's fine, but you're making the wrong decision. I said, don't care. But the damage had been done, and he couldn't get himself. And I think that the mission president marginalized him because of it, and maybe didn't treat him as good as he could. And I think the damage was done. To where Josh, I was hoping like the first few months of Josh's mission, he was doing really well. He's baptizing people. He's really had all these friends, these families that loved him, and that was all gone. And I thought that would come back, and it didn't. And so we moved into about June, and I remember I called him, and he was just not himself. And I said, okay, I got to get you home. And he said, okay. And so I called the mission president, and I said, he needs to come home. And he said, I'm not sending him home. And, it's a shame for a mission president to have to send someone home. And I said, look, he's not productive. He's not happy. I said, just let him come home. I said, and the pressing thing is it's June now. And I knew he was going to come home. And I wanted to get him home so I could put him back in school. And I called Nebraska, and I said, hey, I had to go through a committee to get them to, I called him. I said, he's doing something that, he's going to go on a mission for 2 years. He needs a leave of absence. And, oh, by the way, can you hold his scholarship? And they did. And so I called him back, and I said, he may come home after a year. And they're like, well, we can let him back in the school, but we don't know if we'll reinstate his scholarship, and he's going to have to try out for the band. And I said, I don't care. And they called me back, and they're like, you know what, we talked about it. He can come back, and we'll reinstate his scholarship.
Wow.
Okay.
And what I didn't want to happen, what was worrying me, is that he would come back, it would drag out enough, and he would miss the enrollment, and he'd sit in Tokyo for 3 months lamenting about his life. And I didn't want that. So I called the mission president again, and I said, he needs to come home. What do I need to do? And he's like, I'm his mission president. I've been called of God to lead this, and he's not coming home.
Wow.
And so I said, I called Josh, and I said, I'm just going to send you a ticket and just go to the airport and fly home. And he said, Dad, I don't have my passport. The mission president took it. So I called the mission president again, and I said, look, I'm not messing around. You need to send him home. And he's like, don't call me again. There's nothing you can do.
How are you guys feeling right
Pissed.
now? At this point, both of you?
My mantra was, the church is true, the people are not. The church is true, the people are not. The church is true. It was really hard right then, especially because, I said, this is the most joyful kid I have, and I'm just seeing him being tortured.
Yeah.
Yes, disappearing.
And okay, we're supposed to be talking about free agency. There's no free agency here. He wants to come home. Everyone wants him home. Who are you to say we can't bring him home?
Right.
And to take his passport.
Right.
His passport.
Yeah.
Which is standard.
Yeah, but they're not allowed to. They're not supposed to.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing it says on the page of your passport is, do not let this out of your possession and overseas. So I couldn't get any traction. And about a year before, I had gotten a call from the church security. And they said, we need your help. The mission president gave us your number, and there's 2 missionaries that have been arrested in Bangalore. And they're being held in an Indian prison, and they could be there for 6 months. And I remembered a guy that was our government liaison, who was a friend of mine that we did a lot of work with on logistics and stuff like that with the government. And the government in India is just fully bureaucratic. And I called this guy. I said, is there anything you can do to help? And he made some calls, and I'm not exactly sure what he did, but I'm pretty sure he had a friend that went down and paid a bribe and got these missionaries out. And the missionaries decided to stay. The government of India restricts their how many visas they'll give. So there's only 40 missionaries allowed in the whole country. And they're not allowed to proselyte. And what they were charged with was proselyting, even though they said, absolutely, we didn't do it. So, that was fine. But this is a year later. I remember those guys, and I had their business cards. And they had come about 6 months after the fact, and I went to lunch with them when they were in Bangalore, and they thanked me, and I said, I don't know if I really did anything, but I'm glad that they got out and they were safe, and they were both ex bureau, FBI, all that, and so I called this guy. And I said, hey, do you remember me? He's like, yeah, I remember you. And I'm like, well, I'm in Tokyo now, and here's what I'm going through. And he's like, well, technically, they're not supposed to take their passport, and they can get in trouble for doing that. I said, especially in a place like the Baltic area. And he's like, Russia hates the church, and they will look for an opening to do anything against the church they can. And he's like, so you should call the mission department and make a complaint and all that. And he's like, but if you have anybody that you know in the consulate in Moscow, he's like, you could probably call the consulate, but I don't know if it'll help. And I said, okay. So I hung up, and I was stressed about it. And as this was happening, my testimony was going. It was going, just pivoting.
Yeah, because you're worried about your son's life.
Yeah.
And you want to send him a plane ticket so we can come home.
Right.
And your son's mission president is holding your son hostage by keeping his passport, so your son can't come home and save his life effectively.
Right.
Well, and also I think I felt
like he was getting depressed enough to commit suicide, frankly.
And I think the CES letter and Mormon think, I was starting to look at those.
Okay, and because of these experiences?
No, just I think they kind of,
slipped
it might have accelerated it, but it was both. And so I remembered back to my MBA. And I did my MBA with a guy that I was in his study group, and we became friends. And afterwards, he went to work for the CIA. And I was so desperate, I called him. I emailed him. I had his email, and I said, can I talk to you? And he's a member. And I don't know if he's still a member. I'm sure he was. But I called him, and I told him what was going on. And I said, I just need to get my kid home. And he's like, they are not supposed to take their passports. They can get in a lot of trouble. And he's like, here's what would have to happen. He's like, I can't call the consulate. People in assets in that area that we have can't call the consulate, but they can go in and file a State Department complaint from the U.S. to the consulate that their passport has been taken. He's like, but they'll open up an investigation, and it'll be a big investigation. It won't just be driving by the mission home and taking his passport. And he said it could get the mission shut down. He's like, it could have serious ramifications.
Yeah.
I said, okay. And he said, here's what I would do. He's like, I would call the mission president and let him know that you have some connections that can make his life really difficult. And he said, and if I have to call him, I'll call him for you. He says, because that's not right. If your son needs to come home, they should let him come home. And he said, but just make sure you do the right thing and don't, do the right thing. And I hung up, and I was like, I'm going to burn the mother to the ground. I'm done. He messed with the wrong guy. And before I called the mission president, I called my dad. And my dad was he was the one that could always talk me down off the ledge. And he said, what are you trying to accomplish here? He said, you're trying to get your son home. And he said, you could affect a lot of missionaries there and could make the church look really bad. And I said, I don't care. And he said, no, your goal needs to be to get your son home. He said, if you have to go beyond that, then do that. And I said, okay, and that was good advice. So I called the mission president, and I said, look, you're not supposed to have his passport, and I have some friends in very high up places that will call the State Department and file a complaint and report you to the consulate in Moscow, and they'll open an investigation. And he paused, and I knew at that point I had him. And he said, that would be very bad for the church. And that's, started talking about the Savior and all that. And I said, and this was when I knew I was out of the church, and I hope I can say this. I said,
don't say bad words.
I said, don't F with me.
Yeah.
I said, because I will do whatever it takes to get him home.
Yes, that's right.
And so he says, okay. He says, well, I need to talk to Salt Lake, and I need to pray about it. And I said, as long as your prayer puts him on a plane in the next couple of days. And I made it clear that he was coming home not dishonorably. He was just coming home on a medical release or whatever. So I hung up the phone, and 4 hours later he called me, and he's like, yeah, we're going to send him home. And I said, okay.
The miracle of revelation.
That's
revelation,
right.
That's right.
Prayer works.
So 2 days later, I went, and I picked him up at the airport in Tokyo. And as we were driving home, he was upbeat, but he was, he seemed a little defeated.
Because that's not the way to end your mission.
No, he'd had such high hopes for it.
And so we were just talking about normal stuff, nothing, family, the kids, whatever. And I said, he said, now what do I do? And I said, you go home, you call Nebraska, you register, and next week I'm flying you back there. And I said, never, ever try to make the church work for you. Mm-hmm. I said, because it won't. I said, you will, sorry. I said, you'll just frustrate yourself forever if you try to make it work. I said, it's not going to work for you. You're gay. That's fine, but don't try to make the church work for you. And he said, okay. And I had talked to our stake president, and our stake president was a good man. He really was. And he couldn't do anything, but I called him and I said, okay, Josh is coming home. And he said, okay, I want him to give his homecoming talk on Sunday. I was like, all right, I think that will be good. So when we were driving home, I said, this is what he wants to do. I said, I think it would be good for you. I said, he'll give you closure. I said, even though the ward doesn't really know you here, I said, you didn't come home dishonorably. You didn't do anything wrong. I said, and so mark this as an experience. And so he did. It wasn't a formal homecoming, but he spoke in church and spoke about his mission, bore his testimony in Lithuania, and walked off the stand, walked out of the church, and never went back to church again to this day.
Yes. Yeah. Can I ask you, Jennifer, what you were feeling, and if you were in sync at this point with the direction of like never go back, don't try to make it work? For sure on that,
because I knew that there, like he said, there's just no place for a gay person to have a full life. Because I wanted him to be able to have a partner in life, not be stuck to a life of celibacy, and after how he was treated on his mission. Yeah. Too many people feel that gayness is a choice, not that you're born that way. Because if anybody proved that to me, it was him with how hard he fought being gay. So for his own sanity, I agreed. He needed to just be out.
How did it feel, and this can be for both of you, the minute you saw him from when you got him off his mission and you were able to have him in front of you?
So relieved. Yeah. And he bounced back to the kid that I knew pretty fast.
Very fast.
Full of joy and of life and
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a life-saving.
Oh, it really was.
Yeah, it was. Because it was about a week, and it was the week I took him to Tokyo, then I came back, or took him to Nebraska, I came back to Tokyo, and that's when it all erupted for me, and I did my mic drop moment. But when I took him to Nebraska, he tried out for the band, he got back in the band, he got in his classes, he got in the housing he wanted, everything fell into place. And so when I left to go back to Tokyo, I left him in a really good place. It wasn't, he had bounced back, and I knew he was going to be okay.
Yeah.
I think looking back at, some of those experiences, had we not been able, or at least I kind of blame myself, but standing up and saying, no, this isn't right. He's not going to counseling. He's not going to an LDS counselor 150 miles away. He's not staying on his mission. He's not going to stay in the church. It could have turned out very bad for him.
Yeah.
Because
No, we've interviewed several ex-Mormon missionaries who were gay on their mission, and they wanted to die.
Yeah.
They would walk over a bridge and want to jump off. They would just, wish they wouldn't come home. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's very common. It's disturbingly common.
It is.
Yeah. It's very sad and scary. And
to think if they didn't have that, well, our son told us later, this is hard to say. He told us later that if we would have turned on him, he would have just killed himself. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't have navigated everything that he had to navigate, which was, I can't think about how difficult it was for him, but not to have your parents back. Because I made it clear to him, I said, you're going to come home and I'm going to get really ugly here. And I didn't tell him what I did until recently.
Yeah.
I didn't tell him what I was doing. I just said, you're going to come home. Don't talk to the mission president. Don't call him. This is mine. I'll deal with it. and you're going to come home. So just know that. And he's like, okay.
Yeah. I love that you set out specifics like that at that point.
It was clear that it wasn't going to fix itself.
Yeah.
And I had gone from being ambivalent to over the experience to being he cannot be on his mission.
That's right. Yeah. And I think there's considerable research about right, the idea of parental love support, particularly within the LGBTQ experience, how pivotal it is in some of the ramifications when they don't have that.
Something like kids are 8 times less likely to die by suicide or attempt suicide if they feel fully supported by their parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.